What up, Wizards? It's I, Dev from Mtg on this beautiful Sunday morning, alive, not dead, because as you know, I am, of course, unkillable. We had some really bad storms down here in Georgia on Tuesday. It's now Saturday night as I record this, and we've got power, but we still don't have the internet back. We have no idea when we're going to get it back. So we had to resort to getting a Wi-Fi hotspot on Brittany's smartphone, and was hopefully... that's how we're going to try to upload this video. Wish me luck. Either way, there's been enough of a delay. I haven't gotten to talk to you about any of these cards yet, and a lot of them are really, really exciting, but there's also been a lot of them that have come out since spoiler season started. We haven't gotten to do any videos. There's nearly 60 cards that we haven't talked about from this set yet. So what we're going to do is actually split this up into two parts. We're going to use this video to talk about all the rares and mythics that have come out so far, and then we're going to do another video same day about all the commons and uncommons that have come out. But don't let that make you think that we're going to do like, oh, this video is all the relevant cards, the other video is all the draft stuff. No, actually, I'll go so far as to say that I think that the best card in the set previewed so far is an uncommon. So there's that, but there's also plenty of other amazing uncommons that I think we'll see a lot of constructed play that we've seen from the set so far. So don't skip that video. Watch my stuff. But for now, we really don't have a lot of time to waste because I think we've wasted enough time up to this point. You've waited like 3 or 4 days for the very first spoiler video of the season. So let's get it on. Let's talk about all the rares and mythics sort of in order of constructed playable relevancy, kind of. Let's try and do that. Now we have to start somewhere, so let's start with Cut Your Losses here. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue for a sorcery. Target player mills half their library rounded down, but this has casualty too. This has reminder text, which serves us well because we haven't gotten to talk about this ability yet. As you cast this spell, you may sacrifice a creature with power 2 or greater. When you do, copy this spell. You may choose a new target for the copy. So it's 6 whole mana for a card that's never going to win the game on the spot in your mill deck, even if you copy it and you can't sacrifice your Ruin Crab in the red-blue mill deck, because Ruin Crab has 0 power. You got to have at least a 2-power creature to sack to this if you want to copy it. This seems tempting for the Tasha's Hideous Laughter deck, but I really don't think that deck wants it, and after Laughter and Ruin Crab and such are out of the format, this might be a tempting mill option, but I really don't see this ever being a very important mill card. It's very, very expensive, and again, even if you are able to copy it, it's never going to win the game on the spot, and that's what you want a card like this to effectively do in your mill deck if you're going to tap out for it. Casualty is a really cool ability, and I like it a lot. We'll see it on a bunch of cards that I think are great cards as we move through today, but I don't think that this is a great example of a card where Casualty is a broken ability. But we'll move on now to Getaway card, the next worst card, I guess, that we've seen so far, but I could see making arguments for this. I mean, it's a 3-mana vehicle, it's a 4/3 with haste, and whenever it attacks or blocks, you return up to 1 creature that crewed it to its owner's hand. And it's got crew 1, so it's super easy to crew, and there's some stuff that's kind of tempting to want to return back to your hand, you know. Pop my Prosperous Innkeeper back to my hand, I get another treasure and stuff. There's obviously like enter the battlefield triggers that you might want to exploit with this, but you don't really want to crew it with tokens, and a lot of vehicles decks will use tokens. Like a good play line with this would probably be like turn 3 this into turn 4 seek its chariot, crew the chariot with the cats, and then like, you know, crew this with the chariot. Get in, return the chariot to your hand, you cast it again next turn, get more cats, and just repeat this. And like, there are lines with this card, but altogether, I don't think that it's worth it, even as a 3-mana 4/3 haste. Altogether, I can see that if you play this right, it's a card that'll give you some gas, Waka Waka, but needs a little bit more power. Waka Waka. Let's move on, though, to Fight Rigging. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for an enchantment with Hideaway 5. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then if you control a creature with power 7 or greater, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Yeah, we called this one right, everybody. Yay. I think it was an easy one to call, to be honest. You know, Hideaway was an ability that I think we all wanted to like way back in the day, but it just never was quite as powerful as we wanted it to be, mostly because the conditions were relatively hard to get. Now, since this one doesn't have reminder text, I'll just let you know that when this enters the battlefield, you're going to look at the top 5 cards of your library, pick one, and put it under this card. Is how we always used to do Hideaway. Just put the card into exile. And then once you meet the condition, you can play the exile card. In this case, having a creature power 7 or greater is not actually a super hard condition to meet, especially for a mono green deck. not hard at all. And in the meantime, you get a kind of like sparring regimen, that still gets you a card the way sparring regimen does, but it actually gets you a card from your deck that you wanted to play in the first place, as opposed to kind of a crappy lesson or whatever. So that's kind of good. I think you will miss the like pseudo vigilance from sparring regimen if you play this instead, but it's still kind of a fine card, and Sparring Regimen finds its way into the odd arena deck here and there, so I would expect to see this about as often. Let's look at Devilish Valet next. This is, like, on a personal level, one of my favorite cards in the set so far. 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 1/3 Devil Warrior with Trample and Haste. Alliance. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, double Valet's power until end of turn, and it's got some pretty funny flavor text. I like it, at least. But one way or the other, neat card to think about. And you immediately, I thought about Burn Down the House with this card. First of all, Devil Tribal, if you want to do that. But I think you get 8 power out of it if you cast Burn Down the House, right? Because the first Devil doubles its power to 2, and the second Devil doubles its power to 4, and the next one doubles its power to 8. I think it works that way. There may be a weird thing where the triggers all go off at the same time and see that Valet has 1 power each time, so it doesn't really double its power. I don't think it works that way, though. I think it works the way you want it to work. So judge, let me know in the comments section. One way or the other, different creatures coming into play at the same time, I, again, think does proc this multiple times the way that you want it to. It also probably works pretty well with stuff like Taurens, Born to Drive, stuff like that. Anything that puts multiple tokens into play at the same time probably deals with this. But even if you're just like, you got a Welcoming Vampire out, you cast a small creature, you draw a small creature, you play that small creature, and suddenly this thing is 4 power. Or maybe you equip it, right? So if you equip it, its power starts at like 3 or 4. You cast a creature, its power doubles to 8, and you swing in on your equipped dude. I don't know. Altogether, I think this is a little bit too much work, to be very honest with you, but I want to live the dream of like winning a game on stream with Devilish Valet, so I love this card. It's probably a card you're going to see on the jankier MTG channels, and you probably shouldn't really be playing to win, but those are the cards I have a soft spot in my heart for. Up next, let's look at Maestros Diabolos. By the way, this could be Maestros. I have no idea. It's 3 mana, Grixis colors, a blue, a black, and a red for a 1/4 Vampire Warrior with Death Touch and Haste. Whenever Maestros Diabolos attacks, I've now pronounced every word on this card every way that I could. If you don't control a devil token when this thing attacks, you create a tapped and attacking 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals damage to any target. In terms of actually passing the test for like standard constructed playability, I'm pretty sure it doesn't quite do that, but the haste might prove me wrong. The death touch might be problematic enough to prove me wrong on that end too, but one way or the other, I think this is one of those cards that, again, I personally love. I want to make work. I want to play on stream. I want to see what the play patterns especially look like, because I have some hope for it. But one way or the other, I don't, in the end, have complete faith that this card is as good as I want it to be, and it's probably a little lackluster in a lot of situations. But I guess we'll see when the time comes to actually play it. But I'm not getting the best vibes from this, but I do like the card. Next, let's look at Wiretapping. I guess this is the section of the list where I have to reiterate that I really like these cards, but I don't have much faith in them, with these mana costs especially. Wiretapping is 5 mana, 4 and a blue for an enchantment with Hideaway 5. Whenever you draw your first card during each of your draw steps, draw a card. Then, if you have 9 or more cards in hand, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. I don't have a lot of faith that a card like this is actually good. This looks like more like a commander or casual table kind of thing. But I can only think that in like 1998, playing this card at the kitchen table with my buddies, it probably would have been super powerful, and it looks really good still in terms of the text box. But I'm in today's modern constructed Magic, I'm just not seeing it, guys. I'm also a little upset that the card is called Wiretapping, and even though the flavor does kind of work, it doesn't have anything to do with tapping anything. You see what I mean? How we have a whole thing in Magic about tapping things, but this doesn't. You see what I'm saying. Anyway, let's look next at Captain Falcao. Falcao Spara, Pact Weaver, is 4 mana, 1 in Bant colors, so a blue, a green, and a white, for a 3/3 legendary bird demon, with cool creature types, with flying and trample. When it enters the battlefield, it gets a shield counter. I'll talk about that in a second. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast spells from the top of your library by removing a counter from a creature you control in addition to paying the other costs. So in this case, you get kind of a ranger class or something that's on its last chapter, or its last level rather. But you have to remove counters from stuff. That means you can remove the shield counter from Falcao. What is a shield counter, Dev? A shield counter is a counter with the text that says, if this creature would be dealt damage or destroyed, instead remove the shield counter from it. So a shield counter is actually a very valuable thing. It's not indestructible, and it's not hexproof. Note how those are abilities that people have talked about are kind of annoying, and we don't want them in standard and stuff. Not everyone says that, but I think enough people have said that Wizards has heard those people's complaints. And I think that shield counters are kind of an elegant solution to that problem. I think they're a really cool idea, all things considered. And the fact that this is a 4-mana 3/3 flying flample, as we call it around here, with indestructible 1, I guess we'll call it, I do kind of like a good bit. There's still plenty of exile in the format that can kill this without, the shield counter factoring in. So in that way, it's fair. If you really, really need to cast the card on top of your library, then you can just remove the shield counter from it. But you can also remove like +1/+1 counters that you've gotten from Luminarch Aspirants and other stuff. There's plenty of counters to go around in the current standard. So I think the card is somewhat strong, but I do think the stat line is a little bit low for what you're paying for it. I think it's a little bit difficult to cast again for the stat line. But a shield counter might be really, really valuable. A shield counter might be incredibly valuable. And again, even if you only ever get 1 or 2 cards off of the top of your library, then it's probably worth it. I mean, Bant Flyer, that gets you card advantage, seems really good, and it seems especially good as a commander, which I imagine all of these legends from this set are meant to be strictly commanders, and probably not really meant to be seen as constructed playable, but that's our job, is to evaluate all these for constructed playability, and there's a reason this card is kind of firmly in the middle of the list, is because I think that there's an argument for playability on this, but at the end of the day, I don't know that it quite hits the mark. But we'll see if this card can get a chance to shine in Standard. Yes, that was a Smash Brothers joke. I make those. Let's look at Xayatura the Incinerator next. 6 mana. 3 and then Jund colors. It's a black, a red, and a green. For a 6/6 legendary demon dragon with flying. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, Xayatura the Incinerator deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target, and you create 3 treasure tokens. This, I actually want to say, is kind of good, but again, just like some of the other cards we've talked about here recently in the video, way too expensive. 6 mana is so much, but not a terrible reanimation target, I would say, and plays really well with the other reanimation targets in your deck. Probably also kind of good in the Olivia deck. The fling ability on it could just win you the game on the spot, which is awesome. That's what you want it to do. But in case the fling ability pops off and doesn't win you the game, getting 3 treasure tokens is actually very good. And consider this too, that the turn that you play this card, even if you do have to pay the 6 mana for it, right? The turn that you get this card on the battlefield, it still has some relevancy, right? Like the ability procs, the turn it enters the battlefield, and you're able to sort of pay back 3 of the 6 mana that you paid for the card in treasure tokens. And that is not unimpactful, I guess we'll say. Altogether, I really, really like this card, and I want to try it out. I do think that decks with lots of treasure tokens, and maybe, again, Reanimator decks might want to take a look at this thing. Fling every single turn is pretty absurd when you really think about it. I imagine if this thing is able to sit on the battlefield for a turn or 2, it probably ends the game so long as you have another creature or 2 sitting around. So I really like this guy, but as far as actually getting him on the table in the first place, that's going to be a slow process, and we'll see if waiting, 4 to 6 turns to play this guy in the first place is worth being able to cast a card that normally costs 2 mana. Fling. Right, so I'm just not too sure about it, but I do like it. Up next is Mysterious Limousine. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for a 4/4 vehicle. It crews for 2. Now, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you exile up to 1 other target creature until Limousine leaves the battlefield. If a creature is put into exile this way, you return each other card exiled with Limousine to the battlefield under its owner's control. So this works in a couple of interesting ways. It can just be a 4/4 Banishing Light, Oblivion Ring, one of those white cards that exiles a thing till it leaves the battlefield. It only targets creatures, and it's 5 mana. Those are the bad things about this card, but let's say it comes down and it nabs one of your opponent's creatures. And then your opponent plays a better creature. Well, you can just attack with Limousine, drop off the thing that you exiled first, and then pick up something else in the Limousine. Pick up that, new, exciting, better creature that you really don't want your opponent to have. That's neat, because your opponent can never really play a better thing and still leave your Limousine alone, because you'll just snatch that instead, right? So that's kind of cool. But you can also, of course, put your own things in the Limousine. You can exile your own stuff, and then the next time you attack with the Limousine, drop off the stuff that you exiled, pick something else back up. You get an enter the battlefield trigger repeat. So there's a couple of cool ways to use the Limousine. This means that it's good against, decks that don't play creatures and decks that do play creatures. Because if you're playing against a control opponent that doesn't have any juicy targets for the exile ability, then maybe you can target your own, Professor of Symbology or something else with an ETB trigger and repeat those triggers. So there's some cool things about this card that I like a good bit, and this is where we're starting to see some cards that I think actually could see some constructed playability. But again, this one I think might just be a little bit too expensive, and in this case, kind of hard to find a deck that truly wants to play it. But up next, let's look at Evolving Door. Do you get the joke? It's 3 mana, 2 and a green for an artifact. You pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice a creature. Count the colors of the sacrificed creature, then search your library for a creature card that's exactly that many colors, +1. Exile that card, then shuffle. You may cast the exiled card. Activate only as a sorcery. You can cast it, not without paying its mana cost. You can just cast it. You can pay its mana cost to cast it. That's lame. You can also only do this as a sorcery, so that's pretty dumb. You can't sacrifice a creature that has removal pointed at it, or something went wrong in combat, so I sacrificed this dude. So you can't do that. It's strictly based on colors, which could be okay, because you sacrifice a single color guy, you go to get a 2-color guy, maybe you have a 3-color guy in your deck, so you sacrifice that guy, get a 3-color guy. It could work, but altogether, this card just kind of seems lame. It could have some use, but it's probably worse than a Pyre of Heroes, or, it's just, I want this card to be okay, but it's probably nothing more than a joke. And I don't mean it's a joke, look how terrible and pathetic it is. I mean the actual joke inherent in the name is the best part of the card. I have to pay the casting cost of the thing too. Why would I pay a mana and sacrifice a guy just to have to pay the casting cost of the thing? No, I'm not doing it. Let's move on to another thing that you might be tempted to call a 3 mana do nothing thing or whatever. But I actually think that this card has some potential. This is Halo Fountain. 3 mana, 2 and a white for an artifact. You can pay 1 white, just a white mana, and tap it, and untap a tapped guy you control to create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. Now you can also pay 2 white mana, tap it, and untap 2 guys you control that are tapped to draw a card. And you can also pay 5 white mana, tap it, and then untap 15 untapped creatures you control to win the game. Okay. So let's break this down. Let's look at this as a 3 mana white thing that makes creatures. Okay, just for 1 mana a pop, you can make creatures and create a sort of pseudo vigilance, by the way. But let's not even think about that. It's a 3 mana white card that creates creatures. Creature Factory. Not bad. It's also a 3 mana white card that draws cards. Also great. That's pretty good. All right. Now, on the tertiary, all right, we've discussed primary, secondary, tertiary level. 1 out of every 30 games, it might possibly has the potential to win you the game on the spot, which probably almost never ever happens. But again, it could. But I wouldn't focus too much on that. I would just focus on the potential this card has to make dudes. If left unchecked, it can potentially make enough dudes to win you the game, but it just makes guys. By the way, it can even make guys at instant speed. It can also draw cards at instant speed. It can untap dudes to block for you and you draw a card. That seems good. It can untap a guy to block for you and also create a guy to block for you. It seems good too. Like in the sort of fabled mono white mid-range deck that every content creator, it seems, has worked on for the past like 4 set releases. Like, we know this deck exists. Like, we're gonna make it one day. This seems like an interesting sort of centerpiece, you know. I really like this card. Again, it's not one that I think is going to make top tables, but it's also one that I wouldn't be surprised to like subtly be included as like a 1 or 2 of. In certain decks. You know, I really wouldn't be. I've talked about this card for way too long at this point. Maybe I'm a little addicted to it. Halo. That's the in case you don't know, Halo's a delicious candy in this set. For some reason, they decided to go with that. But one way or the other, I could see myself getting hooked on this card. Now let's move on to Ledger Shredder next. 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 1/3 flying bird advisor. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives. Now, in case you need a refresher on this, you draw a card and then you discard a card. Now, if you discard a non-land, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Ledger Shredder when it connives. So this can get fairly big over the course of a game. You know, if Clarion Spirit is any indication of how often you can cast more than one spell in a turn, I think this could be, you know, a 2 mana investment for a 3/5 in just a couple of turns. So, you know, on turn 3 you play this, then you play a 1 mana thing. And suddenly you get to dig into your deck a little bit. You get to discard a flashback thing, maybe, or maybe a disturb guy, who knows. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on this, you know, you're feeling good. So by the time it actually attacks, maybe it connives again, digging even deeper into your deck, finding the right cards, you know. Like, I don't know, one way or the other. In a sort of blue-white aggro deck or something like that, or maybe a Reanimator deck could work. An early creature that blocks well, grows throughout the game, allows you to discard threats into your graveyard and also draw into important cards. I could see something like this being a sort of glue piece in multiple somewhat important decks right now, or decks that are looking to become important. So, I don't know. I could see this being a key piece. It may look a little weird. It may not even look like much to some people, but the initial investment is relatively low. We've seen that the condition is relatively easy to meet with powerful cards. And even though the condition doesn't put a body on the battlefield like Clarion Spirit does, I do think that in the right decks, again, combo decks, or decks that are looking for very specific cards to make their plans work, this allows you to churn through your deck. In decks that want to play in their graveyard, this allows you to milkshake and bring your boys to the yard, right? So there are lots of uses for a card that only costs 2 mana. The initial investment is low, and it aids a lot of, you know, it's not the engine in and of itself, but it definitely aids in a lot of plans that decks want to enact right now. So I really like this card, and I think that it has some work to do. Now let's look at Urabrask, Heretic Priority. Now this is a Phyrexian guy. Don't lose your mind. He's 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 4/4 legendary Phyrexian Priority with haste. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, instead they exile the top card of their library. They may play it this turn. This is really, really neat. Look, okay, 5 mana 4/4 haste is both not a super playable stat line, and also kind of the very bottom of the line of fringe playability. 5 mana 4/4 haste is just kind of okay by itself. But this, again, is a howling mine in a way. It's a red thing that draws you an extra card every turn. But it also denies your control opponents from stocking cards in their hand. Right? They effectively have to draw. They have to play whatever they draw on a given turn, or they lose it. And that's really neat. It has some cool implications. Now, of course, this makes this a kill on sight for control decks and stuff, which it will be, and it will happen. This will be killed almost certainly on sight immediately by Vanishing Verse and the like, as soon as you play it. So I can't say that I fully recommend this card. I think there may be better ways to spend 5 mana, but especially once cards like Goldspan Dragon are out of the format, this might be your best option for 5 mana in those red decks. And it's a neat form of reach, right? It gives you card advantage in the late game that you wouldn't otherwise have, that gas that red decks tend to need, especially a deck like Big Red. A red mid-range deck needs this kind of card advantage because it's usually out of cards by the time it plays its 5 mana cards. So, this giving you extra cards throughout the game is really important for those decks. But also, again, sort of denying your opponent certain cards that would be good against you, instant speed stuff. Also great. So I'm a huge fan of this, but I'm reticent that it sees much standard play. But I'm rooting for it hard, and I think that it could. But let's look at our first Planeswalker of the day. Now, if you're mathing correctly, that means I think it's the worst Planeswalker we've seen so far from this set. But it's a Vivian. I'm a fan of Vivian. It's Vivi on the Hunt. 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. You can +2 Vivi to sacrifice a creature. If you do, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice creature's mana value. Put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Not falling for these abilities anymore. I'm not doing it. You can also +1 Viv to mill 5 cards, then put any number of creature cards milled this way into your hand. You can also -1 Ant Viv to create a 4/4 green Rhino Warrior creature token, which is why I think all the action on this card is. Theoretically, you can get 4 Rhinos out of this before she dies. But even just a series of -1, -1, +1, -1, +1, -1. I think that's actually worth your 6 mana investment all day. But 6 mana is a lot. That's a lot for this Planeswalker. That said, I think that if she stays out for more than a turn or two, she's doing a lot of work for you. If she puts 2 Rhinos into play, that's still, right, that's 2 guys, 8 power, 8 toughness, and at this point, a 2 loyalty Planeswalker. For your 6 mana investment, I think that's good. So, it's going to be hard to keep this out for multiple turns in a format with Vanishing Verses in every deck and stuff. But that said, if this does get to roll, if this gets to stay on the battlefield for more than a few turns, you're probably winning the game because just the +1, -1 loop looks really good on this. And I am super tempted now to make an Abzan Planeswalkers deck. Just forego the stupid, say, Esper Planeswalkers deck. We're playing green because I want to try this card out, but at the end of the day, 6 mana is so much. 6 mana it's hard for a card to see play in standard at 6 mana, but I think that this has some chance. It really does. I just can't hate Ant Viv. There's nothing you can say to me that would make me hate this beautiful lady, but the same thing is true of Elspeth. This is not the best Elspeth we've ever seen, I don't think, but it is still a very good Planeswalker that I think almost certainly sees play in Standard. Resplendent is 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. You can +1 to choose up to 1 target creature. Put a +1/+1 counter and a counter from among flying, first strike, lifelink, or vigilance on that creature. You can -3, this is the good ability by the way, to look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield with a shield counter on it. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You can also -7 this Elspeth to create a 3/3 or 5, create 5 3/3 white angel creature tokens with flying. So 15 power on 5 guys, like it's a burger place. They will be -7, they'll make you a burger. One way or the other. The -7 is actually closer than a lot of Planeswalkers' ultimate abilities. It's only a couple of turns away. So that's kind of good, but then that means you have to +1 it a couple of times, and the +1 is kind of crappy, to be honest. The +1 isn't great, but I do think that the putting a first striker lifelink counter on it is going to be more relevant than you think a lot of the time. Help play defense and all that. Vigilance counter helps plays defense too, but you already have to have a creature in play. That said, these Orzhov decks, or these Esper decks, these decks that are white and already focus on playing a lot of Planeswalkers, I could see totally playing like a copy or two of this. Hell, in the Esper deck, this gets like a Kaito Shizuki with its -3. Like it has the potential to just, you pay 5 mana for your Elspeth, and you get basically a 2 loyalty Elspeth and a fresh loyalty Kaito for 5 mana. 8 mana value on turn 5. Like, yeah, I think the Esper decks might want a card that can do that and can also make their little tokens bigger as time goes on, right? And sometimes you just win the game off the ultimate ability, again, like every now and again. So, I don't know. I think it's probably worth playing a one-of. Worth noting, those decks already have the ability to play a 5-mana Planeswalker like Kaya, and they don't. So, I'm not too sure if they end up playing something like this, but the ability of this -3 to just get any permanent type, right, that seems great to me. So I think that it has a chance because it can grab a wedding announcement off the top of your library, it can grab a Kaito Shizuki. It can grab another 3-mana Planeswalker that's in this set that we'll talk about later on in this video, much later on in this video as a matter of fact. I think that card is very relevant, but there are multiple 3-mana Planeswalker options for this to grab. Multiple important 3-mana enchantments it can grab, and of course, it can grab a creature that can then protect it when you say go. So that's another important thing the card can do. I just think there's a lot of good things about this Elspeth. I don't necessarily want to pay 5 mana for a 3-mana thing, but that's not the way to look at it. The way to look at it is that you're paying 5 mana for 8 mana value in all, right? So I do like this card. I think it sees some play, whether it's the existing Planeswalker decks, or again, whether we see like an Abzan Planeswalker deck that can maybe make better use of the -3 mode because it has more important creatures to grab, perhaps. Like, there's ways to look at this. So altogether, I really like this Elspeth. I think that it's balanced well. I don't think it's the best Elspeth ever. I don't think it's the best Planeswalker in Standard, but I do think it's one that's more than worthy of consideration. Good card here. Now, friendly notification, passengers. We are in the top 3. Did you expect that? After a mere 45 minutes together, we have made the top 3, everybody. Let's look next at Evelyn the Covetous. Now, just so you know, I am on take number 7 of trying to explain this mana cost to you. This should be easier than I'm making it on myself. This is 5 mana in total. You have to spend 2 and a black, but then you have 2 hybrid costs, a blue and a black, and a red and a black. So this can go, theoretically, in a mono-black deck. That's neat. But it can also go in a red-black deck. It can go in a blue-black deck. So there's lots of different decks. It can play. Grixis can play this, and it's still very easy to cast. So I love the casting cost on this, and I especially love you can play this in mono-black, and I kind of intend to, but one way or the other. This is 5 mana for a 2/5 legendary vampire rogue. Good creature types there. That also has Flash, which I think is critical to this card's playability. When Evelyn the Covetous or another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of each player's library with a collection counter on it. Once each turn, you may play a card from exile with a collection counter on it if it was exiled by an ability you control, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. Hello. Now, I've seen a few people kind of confused about part of this, and it's the if it was exiled by an ability you control. Yeah, that actually makes some degree of sense. That's so if your opponent has an Evelyn, you can't cast the stuff they exiled. You have to cast stuff you exiled. Makes sense. But one way or the other, I do, turns out, really like this card mostly because of the Flash. It's card advantage, straight up card advantage from the top of both libraries. Like, what's not to like about a card like this? It's just sort of kind of obviously strong. You just get a couple of cards the turn this comes into play, right? If you untap on your turn with it, you can then cast those cards, or you can maybe cast like a 1 or 2 mana vampire and get even more cards to try to cast. Like, the fact that this procs off of you playing more vampires is just unbelievable. It didn't have to do that. Yeah, I think the card is just kind of on its face a pretty powerful card. Up next, let's look at GalaGreeters. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf druid with Alliance. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You put a +1/+1 counter on GalaGreeters, or you create a tap treasure token, or you gain 2 life. Now these guys, again, are just kind of obviously good. It's just an initial 2 mana investment. Can proc up to 3 times a turn. This one can proc on your opponent's turn if you have ways of making tokens or flashing creatures in or whatever. But even if it only happens on your turn, like ever, like this can get bigger as the game goes on. Importantly, ramp, create treasure tokens is very good even if they are tapped. And I see why they have to be tapped. I see why that would be broken if they weren't tapped. You just cast a 1 mana guy, get a treasure token, use that treasure token, cast a 1 mana guy, and keep going. So I guess I get that, but one way or the other, it can still create a lot of extra mana for you over the course of just a turn or two. And it can even gain you a few life if you need to do that from time to time, you know. Like, I imagine this could go in those green-white life gain decks that play all the Voice of the Blessed and blah, blah, blah. It could possibly do that. Whenever you play a creature, you gain 2 life. It only procs once a turn in that way, but, you know, if you happen to play other creatures your turn, then it just does other good stuff. None of the stuff it does is bad ever. So, one way or the other, I could see this being in all kinds of mid-range decks that play a good number of creatures. I don't think it goes in a great many aggro decks, but I could be wrong about that, you know. And you play a creature, you play this on turn 2, and then turn 3 you play another creature, and it immediately becomes a 2/2. The next turn, it immediately becomes a 3/3 when you play another creature, right? So it does get big enough to start swinging for damage, but I don't think it gets big enough fast enough to really do the damage an aggro deck wants. I see this as more of a mid-range card that creates mana for you occasionally, can get bigger when you need it to, help you, you know, stave off the aggro tide until you can stabilize. So there's a lot of good things I like about it. It's a good, solid mid-range 2-drop with some versatile options. Procs a bunch of times a turn if you need it to, but even if it only procs once a turn, still fine. Worst case scenario, is you play this on turn 2, and you don't play a creature for the next 2 turns. That's really bad. And it sucks that it doesn't really do much the turn it actually enters the battlefield. But one way or the other, I think this thing gives you enough incremental value early enough in the game at just 2 mana that it's probably worth playing in a ton of green decks. But let's look at the last card of this video, and I think the best rare or mythic that's been spoiled so far, I think. And that's Obnixilis, the Adversary. This is 3 mana, 1 a black and a red, and that's a big part of why I think it's one of the best cards spoiled so far. This is just a 3 loyalty walker, but it has casualty X. The copy isn't legendary and has starting loyalty X. We'll discuss that in a second. You can +1 this. Each opponent loses 2 life unless they discard a card. If you control a demon or a devil, you gain 2 life. You can -2 Obnix to create a 1/1 red devil creature token. You know what those do. When they die, deals a damage to a target. And you can -7 Obnixilis. Target player draws 7 cards and loses 7 life. The old Gristlebrand special. So casualty X, right? So if I sacrifice an Eye Twitch or Shambling Ghast or something like that, I'll just bring those up again. When I cast this on 3, then I get a 3 loyalty planeswalker and a 1 loyalty planeswalker, both of which can immediately +1 to make my opponent discard cards or lose life or whatever. That's not too bad, actually. I can also cast this on 3. Sacrifice my Shambling Ghast, right? Kill a guy, get a treasure or whatever from the Shambling Ghast, and get a 1 loyalty this. Now, the 1 loyalty copy, I can +1 it, make my opponent discard or they lose 2 life or whatever. And then the 3 loyalty actual, you know, real copy of this card, that I can -2 and put a devil into play to help protect my planeswalkers. There's a lot of versatility. Like, even when you play this card on 3, there's tons of versatility, right? Like, there are ways to, say, cast a 3-power creature on 2 that you don't mind sacrificing. And then on 3, cast this and get 2 3 loyalty planeswalkers, which is very, very good. But let's also talk about what happens when I sacrifice, say, a 7 or 8 power creature, perhaps. And then I just get to draw 7 cards, like, immediately for my 3 mana investment. I do have to get rid of a big old dude to be able to do that, and I don't think it's going to happen very often, but it can. In your Reanimator deck, maybe the thing I reanimated is going to die at the end of turn anyway. Or maybe it's going to die when my Olivia dies because it's tied to my Olivia and it's not a legendary vampire. You know, it's going to die anyway. So I might as well play Ob Nixilis, sacrifice the thing that I'm going to have to sacrifice end of turn anyway, and make a big old copy of Ob Nix. That seems pretty good, you know. So I don't know. There's multiple ways you can use this card. It scales really well. And even if you don't casualty, I kind of think it's still fairly okay. It's a little bad if you don't casualty, but it's still a 3-mana planeswalker. That means that it can be gotten back by the Esper charm. That means that it can be gotten with the new Elspeth. The 5-mana Elspeth can just grab this off the top of your library. Those are both, I think, very possibly important interactions in the upcoming standard. So And again, you know, Mardu Planeswalker decks, right, can do the Elspeth trick. And in this case, Grixis Planeswalker decks can play this and like Kaito Shizuki in the 3-drop slot. And they have options in the 4 and 5-drop slot like Lolth and such. So I don't know. I think these like Super Friends decks, this is... Let me just put it this way. Super Friends decks wanted another 3-mana Planeswalker for a variety of reasons. And that 3-mana Planeswalker wasn't super important. It just had to be better than the crappy 3-mana Planeswalker that we already have. Not Kaito, but Rowan. And I think this is much better than Rowan in a lot of ways. I think it's very easy to turn sacrificing that creature into an upside. So if you get 2 Planeswalkers and value off of sacrificing the guy, then I think that's a pretty ridiculous turn 3 play. And if you're on the play against certain decks, I think it's going to be really hard for them to deal with 2 Planeswalkers. If you're up against control, having 2 things out that plus to force them to lose life or discard cards is better than you think. Forcing them to make that decision twice a turn is quite good, actually. I really like this. I love the casting cost of it. I love the mana value on it. And I even love the function of the card. I think that there's probably some insane stuff we can do with this. Whether you sacrifice a 1 or 2 power guy, you get a small Planeswalker to go with your Planeswalker, or you sacrifice a 5 power guy and get a big Planeswalker to go with your Planeswalker. But that's all I got for this one. Make sure again to join us for this part 1, part 2. Spoilers part 1, part 2. That's the uncommons and commons that we've seen so far. And again, I don't think Obnixilis is the best card we've seen so far. I think he's the best rare or mythic that we haven't gotten to cover so far. I think the best card we've gotten to see so far is probably, very likely, an uncommon or common. So you want to see what that is, go check that out. It's not just the draft only video. But aside from that, I'm done for this one. Just let me know how you felt about all of the takes. This was a very long one. My camera cut off halfway through it because the SD card filled up. So I know this was a long video. If you're still here for it, congratulations and thank you very much. I apologize again for the delay. I couldn't help that we don't have internet. They keep telling us we're going to have internet back. They keep saying like, oh, you're going to have it back at 4 o'clock. And then we don't. And we check the app and it says you're going to have the internet back at 8 p.m. And then we don't. And then we check the app and it says you're going to have internet at 11:17 p.m. and then we don't. And then it says 3 a.m. and then we don't. And they're like, this has happened like seriously a dozen times. Like literally, I'm not being hyperbolic. This happens 4 or 5 times a day for the last 3 days. So it's happened a lot. They keep stringing us along and not actually letting us know when we're getting internet back. So today I finally decided to take action, do something about it. I apologize for the wait. But I hope that you enjoyed this one and you'll enjoy the next one and the one after that. But thanks for joining us, everybody. I've got to stop recording this video so I can record the next video. I love you all. Do all of this stuff. Support us on Patreon. $1 a month is all we ask for. Check out the Twitch streams. We're going to be doing at least one of the spoiler videos this season on Twitch as long as we have the internet. So I don't think I can stream with smartphone, Wi-Fi, hotspot internet. I just don't think I can do that. So as long as we get the internet back, we will be doing a stream over there. And also, of course, like, share, subscribe, if you haven't done that yet. YouTube stuff. But aside from that, just let me know how you felt about it, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love, and be kind.